years ago, I was here at City University of Hong Kong to talk about the second Marcos presidency and the politics of redemption. This was after the Marcos family, the dictator Ferdinand Marcos was ousted in a people power uprising in 1986. The Marcos family managed to make a dramatic comeback to power in 2022. So I talked about the possibility of redemption as the dominant narrative of the Marcos comeback. This afternoon, I will continue to talk along those themes and lines, and I will speak about the performative irony of President Bongbong Marcos's anti-corruption campaign. So a couple of months back in the Philippines, a series of torrential rains and typhoons resulted in massive flooding of Metro Manila and parts of Central Luzon. And this act of God resulted in the revelation that an allegation of corruption, mismanagement, irregularities in government-funded flood control project. A practice that apparently had been going on for years already, even beyond or before this administration. And it has been revealed that billions of pesos allocated for flood management initiatives were funneled into ghost projects. But in the Philippines, it's a deadly ghost project because infrastructure that was meant to save lives turn out to be nothing, just a figment of one's imagination. And the billions of pesos that were meant to fund these projects were stolen by corrupt government officials. If not ghost projects, there have been substandard construction. That's the reason why, well, that's part of the racket, right? You build substandard because you take as much as 30% of the budget and pocket it. And then if it gets destroyed, then the next round of budget will take care of the rest. So it's a continuing ATM for these corrupt officials. No? And then the alleged cornering of contracts by a small group of favored contractors. So no less than President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. In his July 28 State of the Nation address issued a strong warning to corrupt government officials and their private sector accomplices involved in this anomalous flood control project. And he declared with so much drama, "Mahiya naman kayo," which is Filipino or Tagalog for shame on you. Okay? Have some shame. And in his State of the Nation address, he vowed to punish the guilty and no one will be spared, even his allies. Okay. He later revealed in a press conference a list of public contractors. 20% of the 545 billion flood control budget was strangely awarded to only 15 contractors. And Marcos vowed to go after them and punish them. So overnight, BBM, as Bongbong Marcos is popularly known, has morphed into an anti-corruption champion and a graft buster. So far, he has revealed the list of contractors and he opened an online portal where ordinary citizens can report instances of ghost projects or substandard projects directly to the president and to the public. It's the first time that a sitting president has done such thing. And then he fired the public works secretary and replaced him with a very dynamic and popular technocrat. And then that technocrat filed cases against the contractor. And just this morning, he formally, well, actually, last week, last Friday, and then this morning, he announced in another press conference the formation of an independent commission to investigate this infrastructure project. Now, let us go back to the 90s. And as the 90s queen of angst, I don't know if some of you still know this singer, Alanis Morissette sang, "Isn't It Ironic? Don't you think?" Okay, here. So, and why is it ironic? Well, critics immediately questioned Marcos Jr.'s credibility as an anti-corruption crusader, given the long-standing cases of ill-gotten wealth or even corruption against the Marcos family, cases that remain unsolved. In fact, some former cronies who testified against his father in the corruption trials, the dictator Ferdinand Marcos, allegedly, the dictator was called Mr. 15% because that was his commission or his cut on flood control projects funded by the Japanese war reparations from 1973 to 1977. Historically ironic, right? So the son is going after illegal contractors and corrupt officials who took commission on flood control project, and his father was accused of the very same thing in the 70s or even earlier. Then BBM vows to return the people's money, but he and his family are also embroiled in tax evasion and plunder cases. Right? So that's another irony. And lastly, much of the Gen Z anger are directed at Nepo babies. You're Gen Zs, so you know Nepo babies. So not only here, but also in other parts of Asia right now. There's that Gen Z revolt in Nepal, no, Indonesia, and Malaysia, and so on and so forth. But let us not forget that the president himself was the original Nepo baby. Back in the day, when the BBM was a student in England, he had the taste for Rolls Royce with an umbrella back there. So, performative is a very popular term right now in social media, especially among Gen Zs, right? So why are you pointing at me? If you have a performative name. So the common buzzword, the common usage of performative is applied by Gen Z in social media through TikTok, no, to Gen Z men who would like to appear cool and progressive and sometimes feminists, and had a knack for tote bags and matcha. No? Okay, so performative in that sense describes actions or expressions that are insincere and done for show, not genuine belief or commitment, often to impress others or gain social standing. So the performative man in the common popular culture among Gen Z is the man with his matcha and tote bag. But the very concept of performative is not new. In fact, it's been used in the social sciences since the 1990s. No? And the academic definition of performative is an approach to the study of social behavior it's based on the shift away from the usual structure-based materialist explanation of human conduct or the purely ideational understanding of human conduct. So the performative uh, turn in social sciences highlighted the importance of speech, action, drama. Nowadays, we call it the optics, the language, the way you communicate. No? So it's to no surprise that the concept of performative has recently been revived, especially with the political phenomenon of populism, particularly a specific kind of populism. And one of the political scientists who revived the concept of performative is that of Benjamin Moffat in his concept of performative populism. And performative populism, unlike the traditional left populism, which is, just like Juan Peron, Evita Peron, Latin American type of populism. The new type of populism are the performative, uh, that is proper for today's social media and even reality TV. And this was applied by Moffat to the likes of Donald Trump. So, reality TV star turned president. And, sometimes the performative approach to populism and to politics in general, especially in the day and age of social media, has become more of a drama, more of disruptive, more of shock value, shock and awe. No? So a lot of new politicians are following this playbook. And that is what performative is all about. No? And I actually now am using performative and trying to combine it with another concept in the arts called dramatic irony, right? So, performative irony happens when an act or statement's delivery contradicts its intent, blending irony and performance to subtly undermine the true meaning, often resulting in self-defeating or absurd effect. So, performative irony is, for example, a celebrity uh, who's promoting uh, the ban of the use of tobacco, but that celebrity is also vaping, right? So that is a form of performative irony, right? Or a politician talking about uh, good governance while a lot of corruption is happening at the same time. So that is performative irony. And this is drawn from a framework that Professor Thompson and I have been using in our recent publications, no? Called discursive institutionalism, which is a combination of two concepts: discourse, ideas matter, and institutionalism in which institutions matter. So this is an approach that tries to combine the structural, the institutional aspect of politics, and the agential, the human conduct based on one's idea. And this is manifested through now again a popular term used by many analysts, pundits. Everyone's using it: narrative. No? And institutions refer to institutional capabilities, whether you have a strong president or a weak state, etc. Now, in the case of BBM or Bongbong Marcos, in my previous talk here at the City of Hong Kong, I argued that the Marcoses were able to come back to political power in the Philippines because of their use of narrative exploiting the weakness of Philippine politics. And they did this, BBM succeeded in simply flipping the narrative or changing the story. No? So whereas the image of the Marcoses was that of a family that was chased out of the presidential palace, exiled abroad, no? Suddenly they portrayed themselves as victims that needed to be redeemed or to come back, right? And this is also part of another approach to the study of Philippine politics and uh, specifically the Philippine presidency, no? Which we call political time. Okay? So since the time of Ferdinand Marcos, no, we argue that political time, when you look at leaders or presidencies, and this is based on some of the ideas of an American political scientist, Stephen Skronek, no, whom we modified to apply to the case of the Philippines, no, you look at leaders, whether they belong, whether they are affiliated to a dominant narrative or they are opposed to a dominant political configuration. A political configuration is a combination of the support of strategic elite groups, no? The institutional capacity, whether the institutions are weak or strong, or the legitimacy of the president based on his or her political narrative. Okay? So in the course of the post-Marcos, post-1986 revolution, no, there have been those that are either affiliated or opposed, no, and vulnerable and resilient. Okay. Now, what were the dominant competing narratives throughout the post-1986, post-people power EDSA political configuration? No? Well, there is this dominant narrative of good governance. Okay? Good governance. No? Founded by the icon of the people power revolution, Corazon Aquino, Cory Aquino, in which the main narrative of the liberal reformist dominant narrative is, trust me, I'm good. So it's a form of moral politics. No? And this has always been challenged by a form of nationalist populism, sometimes even authoritarian populism, as the counter narrative by the other president, Joseph Erap Estrada, who was the original post-EDSA populist. No? Erap para sa mahirap. Erap is the nickname of Estrada. Erap is for the poor. Typical populist narrative. And then, of course, the other populist that emerged recently is Rodrigo Duterte, the Punisher, the strong man, no? The guy who is now in The Hague, about to face trial for crimes against humanity. Okay. Initially, Bongbong Marcos, who was originally allied with the Dutertes, no? And since he was the son of a dictator, everybody thought that he would follow that same path. But apparently he did not. No? In most of his policies, it diverted from the... Originally in 2022, there were a lot of people saying that the victory of Bongbong was a continuity of the Duterte brand of strongman populism. But apparently, Bongbong did not follow that path. He became more like a reluctant Democrat rather than a strongman authoritarian like his father or even like Rodrigo Duterte. Now, if that is the case, why is he suddenly morphing into an anti-corruption crusader? What is the reason why he suddenly changed his narrative again? Two things. Okay. We just had our midterm election and his political coalition underperformed. And the Duterte forces won significantly, and even the so-called liberal reformists won significantly in the recently concluded midterm elections, particularly in the Senate. Now, why was this important for the Bongbong Marcos presidency? Because Bongbong Marcos was originally in alliance with the Dutertes. Suddenly, the political coalition supporting the Marcos administration decided to impeach the vice president. And the Senate is the one who's going to hear the trial for that impeachment. But suddenly, no, the Supreme Court also stopped that impeachment by declaring it as unconstitutional. So this was a back-to-back political setback for President Marcos. And in the Philippines, since it's a one-term, 6-year presidency, the midterm or the third year is a signal whether the remaining 3 years would result in cementing the legacy of the presidency or whether that president would become a lame duck president. Okay? So Marcos needed a win because of the two political setbacks, the underperformance of his coalition and then the junking of the impeachment trial by the Supreme Court. So he needed to have an impactful, dramatic State of the Nation address to change the storyline, to flip the narrative. And lo and behold, God heard his prayer. Why? Because unlike before, because of climate change now, typhoons and torrential rains have become more deadly. And whereas in the past, corrupt officials would usually get away with the infrastructure racket because, after one typhoon or two typhoons, they can easily say, oh, it's the typhoon that caused it. But the last couple of months, it was almost weekly that we had these typhoons and torrential rain. So you can no longer hide that most of this infrastructure were either not there or were substandard. So it was divine intervention for some. That these crooks were finally revealed because, well, the Philippines is a Catholic country, so we say God wanted it to happen. Okay, so there. So BBM or Bongbong Marcos has become the accidental reformist, an imperfect ally for good governance, and even perhaps a flawed Democrat. Marcos vowed to punish those found guilty, blacklist complicit contractors, and stress that no one will be spared, even his allies. And this has resulted in some pundits and observers to say, including myself, wait, we've heard this line before. Is Bongbong Marcos Pinoy 2.0? And of course, Pinoy here refers to, ironically, the political rivals of the Marcoses, The Aquinos, the arch-rival of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., Benigno Aquino Jr., was assassinated. The assassination resulted in the anti-Marcos struggle, the book of Professor Mark Thompson, the anti-Marcos movement, no, that resulted in the People Power Revolution in EDSA and the election of the widow of Ninoy Aquino, Corazon Aquino, as the first woman president of the Philippines. And then the son became president in 2010 and popularly known as Noynoy or Pinoy, President Noynoy. No? Noynoy was known for his slogan, kung walang korap, walang mahirap. No? Where there is no corruption, there is no poverty. No? So Noynoy's daang matuwid or the straight path, no, is the reform and good governance narrative, no, championed with that slogan, kung walang korap, walang mahirap. No? And it began with a very high public trust and a promise of cleaner leadership, no? Because people supported the candidacy of Aquino. And there were initial successes, no? Noynoy Aquino went after his predecessor and his former college teacher, no? So some of you might go after your former teacher. So
don't give them any ideas.
Yes, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, no, whose 10 years in office was riddled with alleged massive corruption scandals. So he prosecuted former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. His administration impeached a sitting Chief Justice, and he actually jailed 3 senators who were implicated in a pork barrel or money related scandal back in the day. So there were initial successes to his straight path, to his anti-corruption advocacy. However, even his administration wasn't spared from corruption scandals. No? So there have been several corruption scandals under his own administration. But the worst part is, while in terms of rhetoric, storytelling, and narrative, he was able to promote good governance, he failed to institutionalize the gains of his good governance rhetoric. And this led to the disappointment, disillusionment of his followers and the general public. And this resulted in the politics of anger and frustration that paved the way for the rise of the strongman populist from Mindanao, Rodrigo Duterte. Okay? So, if we're going to compare the daang matuwid, straight path of Noynoy Aquino and the mahiya naman kayo pronouncement of Bongbong Marcos, no? Aquino's straight path was an aspirational call for reform, targeting systematic graft to alleviate poverty. BBM's mahiya naman kayo, have some shame, is a confrontational crackdown on specific infrastructure scandal, the flood control project. Now, if we compare the two, what was the trigger? Well, daang matuwid was the public anger at the alleged corruption under the previous Arroyo administration. And then for BBM, it's the fury over the flood control projects. What is the narrative? It's a version of reformism. And that's the irony, that even a Marcos is now accidentally a reformist. No? But albeit a performative one, a dramatic one. No? So daang matuwid was an aspirational reformism, and BBM can be considered performative. What's the target? Well, for Noynoy, it was corruption. In general, for BBM at this point in time, it's specific contractors and politicians. But why did Noynoy's Daang Matuwid fail, and what is the danger for Marcos's anti-corruption? None of them, they are all saying it's corruption. They're looking at systemic corruption. They're looking at the political economy of corruption. But they have failed to relate it with the way we do politics in the Philippines, which is essentially about patronage politics. No? It's patron-client relations from the lowest level all the way to the national level. And that's how we do our politics, plain and simple. The patron will give favors, jobs, contracts, whatever, in exchange for political support. And that's the entire infrastructure of political monopoly, of clientelism, that has paved the way to the rise of oligarchs and political dynasties. And unless we go into that, go attack that very root of the problem, then even this current anti-corruption campaign of Bongbong Marcos will fail. Last two slides. Earlier this morning, BBM gave the greatest performance, political performance of his presidency. In a press conference this morning, he amped up his performance, and probably this is the most consequential set of policy statement for his presidency. He promised to go after everyone, including his cousin, the speaker, who everyone's saying is the one of the guilty parties, and their political ally, a certain congressman, who is also one of the top contractors in the country. No? And he encouraged citizens, including the Gen Zs, no, to express their anger and join in protest. And this was the most dramatic statement he said this morning. If I wasn't president, I might be out in the streets with them. Okay. So he encouraged citizens to express their anger in protest, albeit peacefully, and vowed to change the way government conducts business. And he said it's going to be an inflection point. He just appointed a former Supreme Court Associate Justice. He formed this independent commission. Okay, again, a lot of people are skeptical because his father also initially formed an independent commission to investigate the assassination of Ninoy Aquino back in 1983. No? And but this time, this three-person commission is headed by a former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court who was appointed by Rodrigo Duterte, and a former Public Works Secretary who was appointed by Noynoy Aquino, and a professional forensic accountant with the country's top accounting firm. And then as an advisor and investigator, the very popular mayor of Baguio City, who was a former police investigator. So initially, I say, okay, there's some promise to this independent commission. If they are truly independent, we'll see. It's only time will tell. No? Now, our last slide. No? Okay, so what to expect? The series of events in the next few days, weeks, and months will determine whether Bongbong Marcos will finally achieve redemption for himself and his family name, or will he be repudiated again? No. Well, he needed to protect his legacy. No. So the anti-corruption campaign could be a strategic maneuver by President Marcos to redefine his administration's legacy and avoid becoming a lame duck president. Again, changing the storyline, flipping the narrative. All pointing towards the next big political game contest, the 2028 presidential elections. No? He might gain political leverage in anticipation of the 2028 presidential election. By focusing on corruption and flood control, Marcos Jr. might establish good governance narrative that could provide a contrast to Vice President Sara Duterte and her political faction. Then the political realignment has already happened with the ouster of the Senate President, and then there are talks of changing the speaker. No? But, if they keep going after each other, it will simply result in what some columnists call a circular firing squad. No? So it's the congressman investigating the scandal and pointing towards the senator, and the senator pointing towards the congressman. So it's like a circular firing squad, no? Or Russian roulette. No? Then politics of redemption, the president's commitment to pursuing big fishes. No, if he even prosecutes his own cousin or some senators, no, there are names that are being mentioned already, or some congressmen, then that is a big move, no? And if he succeeds in totally reforming even just the public works department, then he has already done a big contribution to the Philippines and the future of the Philippines. But then again, while hope springs eternal, let's not be too optimistic. And let's not keep our hopes too high, because the Marcoses family historical issues and inconsistencies within his own administration may limit its ability to achieve genuine, lasting, and institutional change, which will potentially hinder his own effort to build an anti-corruption legacy. So let's just hope for the best, but let's all be cautious. So thank you very much for your time.